relative to where Matamoros was in the 1800s, 1850s, it has not followed through on its potential. Today, I would say Matamoros punches well below its geopolitical weight in terms of the different advantages that it has. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. The Mexico-US relationship, as it got older in the 1900s and sovereignty lines were clearly delineated and trade industrialized, you had the creation of the maquiladoras, which is basically these factories inside of Mexico that create products for the American consumer, and trade is going back and forth. And Matamoros was really one of the first places that did this and was at the very forefront of it. And that began to change into the 1980s and 1990s. And depending on who you ask, there are different reasons for that. In my research, a lot of Mexican businessmen and even supply chain executives, locals, kept on referring to this guy, Agapito Gonzalez Cavazos, who was basically a king-like figure in the region. He started as a temp in cotton mills in the 1930s and 40s. He eventually became a top union official. By 1957, he's general secretary of the CTM, and he remains in that post until 1990. Many of the people who try to ascribe the underperformance of Matamoros will ascribe it to him and to his policies. And I think there is a grain of truth in that, but I think that that's actually misreading what happened. Agapito definitely, like I said, was a king-like figure, so maybe power got to his head a little bit, but he was using that power to do things like creating a 40-day work week and making life better for Mexican workers, which, yes, that's bad for business because it makes Matamoros less attractive to foreign capital. And there were other border cities that weren't messing around with that didn't have local unions that were as strong as Agapito's union. So they start going to the other ones. But I think there was actually a much broader structural shift at work. So in the 1970s, 1980s, Mexico is pursuing import substitution strategies. It's still centralized control of the Mexican government. The concept of free trade and of NAFTA, that lies decades in the future. And in that context, where Matamoros's status as a peripheral city, as on the borderlands, of having close ties with the United States, of being ahead in terms of manufacturing and some of these other different things, those were advantages. Now, you get to the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, and then NAFTA is on the horizon. And the Mexican government is no longer okay, really, with this idea that there are going to be these separate unions that are out here that are buttressing the control of the sort of single party dictatorship that runs Mexico. Instead, they want everyone to bend the knee while glowingly accepting neoliberal trade policies. The goal being drive down the cost of production as much as possible so that we get all of this nice FDI and all of the benefits of free trade when we eventually conclude NAFTA. And that was bad for Matamoros because Don Agapito in the late 1980s was still acting in the pre-neoliberal world, but the neoliberal world was coming. And so instead of getting Matamoros ready for being the cheapest, most attractive place for foreign capital to come, he was defending Mexican workers. I can argue why that's righteous, and I can argue why that's short-sighted. Like, in the end, it didn't do good things for Matamoros' economy, and Matamoros is still paying the price for that. You can't talk about Mexico and specifically the borderlands or any of the border cities, Matamoros included, without talking about security. But here, there is a story to tell about Matamoros' security environment, but I'm not sure it's that different than the rest of the border cities. And I think that when you combine Matamoros' economic underperformance with the security crisis that is rampant in all of the border cities, it just sort of adds fuel to the fire for why things didn't happen there. But I'm not sure that it was necessarily a cause. But as you have Mexico launch basically a war on drugs and a war on cartels backed by the United States in the mid-2000s, late 2000s, the war didn't go particularly well. And the cartels started to splinter and started to fight for turf and control. And Matamoros was at the front lines of that. And because it hadn't done well previously, and because the power of its unions and some of these other local institutions had weakened as a result of some of these structural forces that I'm talking about, Matamoros was maybe disproportionately exposed to some of those security issues. But again, I'm not sure that is a unique story to Matamoros in the past or even in the future.